Welcome to the Irish NFL Show's post-draft recap in association with our partner QuinnBet. Before we get into the recap itself, let's just take a moment to discuss some news that was breaking just as we started streaming this evening or shortly before. And we're seeing some reporting that the Jacksonville Jaguars will be playing at least 2 games in London again in the 2024-25 season. And Noel, this was an interesting experiment by the NFL last year, and the Jags would have been delighted with how it worked out because they ended up winning both of those games. They beat the Atlanta Falcons in one, in what was their nominated home game in Wembley Stadium, and then they beat the Bills in what would have been their away game in Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. And it looks like they're going to repeat the trick if that reporting is to be believed, and it comes from some pretty credible outlets. To be fair, we picked it up across CBS Sports, and they seem fairly sure that this is what's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's no surprise when you hear the Jags are the ones being linked with this again. London's become a bit of a home away from home for the Jags over the last few years. They've really been pushing to kind of get as many games as they could over this side of the pond. And yeah, so to hear that again, it's no surprise. We're watching the NFL growing and growing. As you mentioned, the Jags did the same kind of thing last season, and it worked for them. So hey, if it worked before, why not pop back in and do it again and see how you get on with that?
And a good point made in that CBS report, or something that I'm sure a lot of people here will find intriguing if they don't already know about it, is that Jags Stadium being redeveloped. So they're homeless in 26-27 seasons, which is coming up quicker than you think in some ways. So the chances are, and Roger Goodell is already on record about this, the NFL commissioner, saying, look, they could look to incrementally increase the number of games. Maybe the Jags play 3 or 4 or even more games over this side of the Atlantic in 26-27. Like, it doesn't take a massive stretch to think, well, maybe they play 3 games in London. Maybe they play a game in Ireland while they're at it, if we're getting carried away with ourselves.
Yeah, look, wouldn't that be amazing for the Irish fans to actually get a game over here? But again, as I say, it's just felt like this with the Jags. It's always felt like they've been kind of pushing that way. I think not too long ago, a couple of seasons ago or so, the stories were going around, or maybe they were going to try to relocate to the UK, and that kind of thing was going. So yeah, look, the Jags seem to have kind of formed a kind of a strong bond with London. So you wouldn't be surprised, as you mentioned, if they do kind of up their games, given work going on the stadium and stuff like that. So definitely something to keep an eye on to see how that kind of pans out over the next few months and season or whatever.
Big time, and we'll see what the schedule throws up, and if and when that's confirmed. It looks like at least one of those games, incidentally, will be against the Bears. It looks like the Jags away game will probably be against away game, quote unquote, in London. They're both away games, of course, in the broader sense of the term, but their away game will be in Tottenham Hotspur Stadium against the Bears, who will be the nominated home team for that one. Now, we had a great night down in Cork at the Clayton Hotel on Laps Quay on Thursday night last for the draft from the Detroit. And thanks all of you who joined in for that and who watched it later. We were just delighted with the response, with the engagement throughout the show. A lot of people keeping in touch, sending supportive messages, throwing in their own 2 cents and all the picks as they went. Something that we really enjoyed doing, and we're keen to repeat again now that we've just about caught up with the sleep. I think between now and next year, we'll be banking a bit of sleep, a few minutes a night, just to make sure we have the fortitude to get through the night. But with the benefit of time for some reflection on all the excitement since then, we're going to break down all 32 picks. Starting, Brian, with the least surprising of all, which is the number 1 overall pick, which went to the Bears, with which they selected Caleb Williams.
Yeah, and this is probably one of the easiest ones to discuss, and we probably won't spend too much time on it. I think for me, reflecting on the selection, I think what was really refreshing from a Bears perspective, having gone so long without having, I suppose, that established franchise quarterback, is how much he seems to be bought into being a Bear. You see how overall he was when he came out onto the stage, for a guy who knew he was going to be selection number 1 for quite some time. And even you watched the coverage with Ryan Pauls and discussing the selection with him on the phone. And then obviously when they select at 9, and I know we're going to come to the conversation on the Dunze, but again, he was so ecstatic, and they're giving him another weapon for him. It's exciting times for Bears fans, and I'm not saying it because you 2 guys are the Bears fans on the show, but ultimately, like, this division for me this year is going to be really enticing and intriguing. So many subplots that are going to come further down the line, and here's what we'll discuss when we get into kind of season previews and stuff. But great time to be a Bears fan. But again, I always caveat that way. Everyone's a winner in April, but let's see let's see the harsh reality come September.
Look, that's so true, Noel. But I mean, we were laughing about this just before we started recording, saying, like, we're not used to this as Bears fans. It's fine for us to obsess over it, but other people are now saying they're looking forward to watching the Bears next season, that the offensive weapons make it quite an exciting prospect. As Brian said, that the NFC North has now gone from being kind of a fairly dull and unexciting division to probably one of the divisional battles to watch, especially when you want to see what JJ McCarthy is going to do with the Vikings, and we'll get to him as a pick. But these are heady times indeed for Bears supporters, albeit with Brian's quite adroit caveat that everyone's a winner in April.
No, you're spot on. I mean, as you say, as we said, we were talking about it, and when you're watching Total Access or you're looking at any other show and they're talking about the Bears up among one of the first teams and they're talking about playoffs, it kind of takes you back and go, oh, really? But look, this is what Ryan Poles has been building to. We've seen this over the last number of years. He tore it down to the studs for a reason. He had a plan. It feels like everything they've done has been orchestrated. They've known what they wanted to do. They've made the moves to rebuild this offense back up. I mean, he keeps being asked about, the 85 Bears and defense and linebackers. And he pretty much had to come out and say, look, we love our history, but we're making new history here. Things have to change. It's not going to be the same old. This is the way you adapt now for the NFL. And the Bears have gone full stream with this offense now. You look at the receivers you mentioned, tight end is stacked, running back is stacked. And if Caleb Williams is that guy that we hope he is, then look, the Bears have a really great chance, but it is going to be a tough division. We look at the other teams in the North and they're all getting better. So it'll be fun times anyway. No matter what, there should be some really good football in the NFC North.
Yeah, it's funny now, before we move on, how much Bears fans obsess about history. Most of it was bad history. We tend to forget quite quickly, bar 2 or 3 outstanding outlying seasons. Brian, the second pick was Jaden Daniels, Heisman Trophy winner, reigning Heisman Trophy winner of LSU, who went to the Commanders. Again, as expected. This pick was what we thought it would be. But let's reflect on the fact also, and I know we'll come to them again a little bit later in the first round. The Commanders had 11 draft picks. Overall, how do you assess how they spent them? Because the general consensus seemed to be they had a really good draft.
Yeah, they certainly had plenty of positions that need to be addressed. Obviously, the quarterback one being the key one. But as we got closer to the day, I know there was a lot of conversation debated whether they would stick or twist, potentially trade out, even go with a different quarterback. I don't know. That Drake May. But ultimately, I think by 6 o'clock, even earlier on Thursday, we knew it was Jaden Daniels. I mean, even the betting line with Quinn Bet was off the charts. It was nearly suspended at one stage. There was no point in even having a punt at that stage. But they have addressed other needs, and it'd be interesting to see how they put all this together. They've got an experienced head coach coming in there from his time at the Falcons, obviously been in the division the last couple of years. Quietly optimistic about the Commanders. I think they've done a stellar job over the course of free agency as well. I mean, they addressed some immediate needs. Nearly took the entirety of the Cowboys' offensive line with them, but that was a key need. But it was obviously pointing in the direction of we need to make sure we have an established offensive line for the quarterback. But over the course of what they did, they've kind of combated into different various positions. So I think they've got a good opportunity to kind of certainly win games next season and put themselves in a competitive position.
No, the Patriots at 3 took Drake May, and the last time a quarterback went high from North Carolina, it was Mitch Trubisky. So let's sweep that one under the carpet as quickly as possible. Whatever misgivings people might have about this as a landing spot for Drake May, it's again like what the Bears are doing. Jared Mayo and the GM there had to tear things down to the studs, and the general feeling is if the quarterback is there, you got to go for him when he's there. And if it turns out to be a tough season, so be it. But better that than to pass up the opportunity to get your franchise quarterback on a rookie contract.
Yeah, look, that's it. I wasn't sure what way they were going to go. I was wondering if they would take the Bears route from last season, maybe take a big haul and use that to kind of build around. But as you say, you look at these top 3 quarterbacks, and pretty much the consensus was no matter what team ends up 1, 2, or 3, you're going to end up with a good quarterback. You're going to end up with a piece that you can build around. So it looks like the Patriots, as you said, have seen this young player and they've thought, right, let's get him in here. It starts with the quarterback. He may not have to play this year. It'll be interesting to see how much he kind of does. They have Jacoby Brissett, I believe, there. So he's an experienced player who can teach this young rookie coming in, who can kind of work with him. So the option is there to not have to put them into the fire straight away if they don't want to. Now, again, they may, we see the way it happens now. Very few quarterbacks sit when they come in as a rookie. But overall, look, this looks like a really good player. I did think I thought he was the second best quarterback in the draft going forward. I thought maybe Daniels would have a better season next year. But I think overall, Drake May, over the course of a career, he's 6'4", he is that prototypical quarterback. He has the arm, he's athletic, he can move, he can make plays on the run. And I think he has a really, really good future going forward. So he is a piece that the Patriots over time can put pieces around and can build from. And it'll be interesting to see how that career develops as it goes on, and if they really do put the right pieces around him.
By this stage, Brian, the tone of the draft was very much set that people were going to just grab the wide receivers and grab the quarterbacks while they were going. You know, we ended up seeing a record 6 go in the first 12 picks. You know, we had a record number of picks before we even got to a defensive player, which we'll get a little bit later on, like to the point where on draft night it became an in-joke and a running joke for us while we were streaming that, you know, when is Dallas Turner finally going to come off the board? It took quite a few picks before we got there. But at 4, the Cardinals went for Marvin Harrison Jr., who a lot of people said in their evaluation was the best player, regardless of position in the draft.
Yeah, it's it was a huge need for them going into the draft. I was very impressed with what they've done even later on with Darius Robinson, the defensive end, and I think they took Max Melton, a cornerback, in the second round. And people were suggesting, again, mixed opinions, but some suggest he could have went as a late 4th round pick. So I think Cardinals fans will be, again, quite optimistic of what they've done. But for Marvin Harrison, I think ultimately it came down to which wide receiver they preferred the most. And even though called it out last week, there was some suggestions that some people had Malik Neighbors ahead of Marvin Harrison. Ultimately, I think we all knew at some stage once the first wide receiver was going to go off the board, it was Marvin Harrison. I guess it's one of those situations we expected so many trades. Connor, was like maybe an entertaining nil-all draw because you were excited because your mock draft had no trades, and we didn't get the first trade until 11 into 10. But certainly didn't go the way we expected. But once the Cardinals were sticking, it was evident that they were going to go with the wide receiver. Marvin Harrison's arguably a great selection in terms of a wide receiver.
It's an interesting point in terms of receivers, though, because we saw a lot of, you know, point and counterpoint about Neighbors, Adunze, Harrison. But what it comes down to as well is what fits the scheme and what fits the quarterback and what fits what else is available in your wide receiver room. I think on balance, what it came down to for the Cardinals, it seems, was Harrison was the guy who, if you're going to spring a guy from college straight into the NFL, looked the most like WR1, who's ready to plug and play right away. Other guys you might not have felt quite the same way about, or else you were looking for them to complement what else you had. Cardinals didn't really have any of those pieces, so he needs to be the guy, and he needs to be the guy from day one.
I'd imagine that you're able to expect immediate production from this guy. You don't go fourth in the 4th round. And bear in mind, Kyle Pitts went fourth, and like we are where we are with him in terms of the Falcons, and he's got his 5th-year extension, but he's never really delivered, you know, to the same level of production that we expected. But that's probably because of the quarterback situation. I think the Cardinals have seen over the course of the last few games, you know, in terms of when Kyler Murray came back, the answer was immediate. They recognize he's still a talented quarterback. He can be the future for them. So maybe it's a different situation. Everyone will be expecting, you know, an upward trajectory on this offense with Marvin Harrison there, and I imagine the immediate plays from day one.
The next pick, Noel, you know, there was a lot of speculation as to whether the Vikings would trade up and look to grab one of the available quarterbacks. Again, JJ McCarthy was the name most closely linked with them, as we know, and as we'll talk about later on. That didn't transpire to require the sort of draft capital or the sort of trade move that a lot of people previously thought it would. And the Chargers then decided to go for Joe Alt, who looked all ends up the most outstanding offensive line prospect in the draft. The emphasis there and the premium on protecting Justin Herbert, which again set the tone for what we would see later on the night.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was a toss-up for, you know, wide receiver or going for that tackle in Joe Alt, because as you say, Joe Alt does look like a really, really top-class player who will be able to come in and hit the ground running. They obviously go for the offensive tackle in the end. And I think the plan for them is they get obviously the best tackle in the draft. And this is such a deep wide receiver class that, you know, they were picking early in the 2nd round. They end up getting Lad McConkey there. But I mean, so that's the plan. So you get your tackle and you still get what could be a very good productive wide receiver. So now you obviously have Rashawn Slater there and you have Joe Alt now. So there's your bookends for, you know, the next 6, 7, 8 years. And you can be kind of confident that, you know, these guys will be able to protect Justin Herbert and kind of build from there. Because remember, this is a new regime here in the Chargers as well. So they are just starting to, again, put in building blocks that they can, you know, move forward with over the next couple of seasons. So for me, I think this is a great pick. I thought he might go to the Giants with the next pick, just again, because I thought the Giants could take him there and then get a top receiver at the top of the 2nd round. Just because I kind of thought that they had lost Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, that maybe they might look to kind of take one of the big 3 receivers. But look, you can't fault what they've done. I think this is a building block that is absolutely worth taking at this point in the draft.
Meanwhile, back on Ramsey Street, Brian, everyone needs good neighbours. Malik going to the Giants. You got to be happy with that.
I did call it at the start of the show. I felt they would stick and take a wide receiver. Kind of got a little bit thrown by the speculation over the course of the day with JJ McCarthy. But ultimately, I think, see, there's a double-edged sword with GMs. Like, we read stories around why did the GM reach over the years? Why did they reach and take that quarterback? That really wasn't the guy they want. Well, if we're going to stay true to that kind of true to the board in terms of what a GM is doing, like, it was very evident from a week out. The Giants really, obviously, Caleb Williams is out of the picture. The only really quarterback they were after was Drake May. And once Drake May wasn't an option, in the lead up as the hours moved towards 1 a.m. our time and the Patriots weren't willing to move out, well, then they sat tight and took the best player, what they believe to be available therein, and an immediate need in terms of position, which is a wide receiver that can essentially take the top off a defense, because it's been such a long time since the Giants had a threat. So whilst some people are questioning this week why Joe Shane didn't take JJ McCarthy, I think it's, in hindsight, it's been, I think it's recognised now, he didn't want JJ McCarthy. Well, that's probably not be harsh. They had their eyes on one particular quarterback. He wasn't there. We'll take the next player up. And it's a bit of a precarious one now for them, because I think having taken a quarterback, you would give yourself a potential out if the season is poor, that they can argue to the owner that, give us one more year, we have a developing quarterback. That's no longer in play now. So if it does feel like a bit of a winner bust type of season now for both Brian Dable and Joe Shane. So probably the pressure is even more on them, as opposed to may have been slightly less with a quarterback coming in.
But you'd have to think as well, obviously we don't know what goes on in the room, but you'd have to think that Dayball is reasonably happy with Jones to make this decision, to put it mildly, because it's repeating the template, as we said on the night, from what they did in Buffalo, and that, Josh Allen didn't have the most wonderful of starts to his NFL career. There was a lot of doubts about whether he'd pan out. Dayball goes out and gets Stephon Diggs, or the Bills went out and got Stephon Diggs, and that was kind of the key to unlocking Allen. Like, you give him that one reliable weapon that he can go to, and you let him show what he can do.
Yeah, you've also got a second-year center who's productive enough in his first season. You've brought in 2 offensive line guys, experienced guys in free agency. So
and you've Jalen Hyatt. We don't know what he's capable of based on last year. How could he have shone in the offense that was there? Yeah,
and Robinson actually was one who also came back from a serious injury last year. So you could argue they've got some weapons. I think another intriguing one was taking a tight end in the 4th round who dropped Theo Johnson from Penn State, because Darren Waller looks like he's going to retire. So, you could potentially have a new wide receiver and a new tight end going into an offense. Ultimately, it will be down to whether Daniel Jones can stay fit and give production and to get the team back challenging. That's the biggest question mark now going into the season. That's just going to ramp up and intensify as the season goes on. And then you've got the Bill Belichick factor, which is only going to shine a light even more so if the season doesn't go well, potentially him going back to be the Giants head coach.
No, at 7, the Titans took JC Latham off the board at tackle. Another strapping Alabama guy from their outstanding teams of the last couple of years. The Titans were speculated to be the destination for Joe Alt if the Chargers went receiver at 5, or if they traded out the pick, which obviously didn't happen. JC Latham was the next guy up, and they seem more than happy with that as the bulwark in front of Will Levis for next season.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of Titans fans who preempted getting their jerseys early, who'll be looking to see if the team will take that alt off and put on JC Latham there onto it. But again, look,
it'll be Control Alt Delete, you might say. No.
Yes, that actually could be something there. Yeah, but no, I think this is another good pick. This is a big guy. This is another team who are looking to kind of build around a young quarterback who they're waiting to see if he'll be the guy, and they're giving him every chance to do that. I mean, obviously, they brought in Calvin Ridley in the offseason. They brought in Lloyd Cushenberry last year. They had a high pick with Peter Skoronski. So what they're doing now is they're just building up this offense around this young quarterback to give him every opportunity to go and hopefully see if he is the guy. But yeah, look, I like the move. I mean, I thought Fashanu might have gone before Latham, but again, it's probably not too much difference between these guys. The interesting thing for me is obviously JC Latham is a right tackle. I'm wondering, are they going to keep him on the right, or will they be looking for him to go left? That'll be something to kind of keep an eye on. But overall, again, look, it's a good move on a team who really had a need in that position and have gone and filled it.
At 8, Brian, and this was the moment that produced a collective whoa on the stream. We all jumped out of our seats at the same time when the Falcons blew up the draft to select Michael Penix, quarterback from Washington, and nobody was more surprised than Kirk Cousins.
Do we have time to do a separate podcast on this one completely? Yeah. It's an interesting one in the sense of, like, I know there's a lot of smoke screens when you go into the draft, and it's probably leading from, say, the combine and even going back as far as the Senior Bowl, and everyone kind of puts a steer out to put everybody off kilter and what they want to do. But by and large, I would imagine come late February, most teams would factor in free agency into their kind of draft thinking. If we can get these certain players in certain positions, okay, that allows us to move in different ways come draft time. And I imagine there's a bit of a big board. I know there's big board come draft time, but essentially I say there's a free agency big board, which kind of tailors what you want to do around the draft. How do the Falcons in February go into free agency when you think they would be comfortable around what they want to do in the draft? Go, right, we're going to sign Kirk Cousins for $90 million a year. We're not going to mention their communication, nor should they have to. I'm not saying to suggest that Cork should be given all this special treatment like the way Aaron Rodgers suggested when Jordan Love was selected in the draft. But I do feel it's not fair and not reflective of the situation that has been compared this week that the Packers, they're looking at the Packers model, because the Packers were a team that were really competitive and winning. And essentially they could allow for 2 or 3 years. The Falcons right now, whilst they're in a division that's there for the taking, they're not at that level, and they're certainly not a team that should be placed around players that they need to bring in. It staggers me that they haven't gone defense, bearing in mind that your head coach brought in as a defensive minded guy and could do a lot with the likes of Dallas Turner and even some of the other suggested defensive ends that were selected even before Dallas Turner. It just doesn't make any sense for me, because what happens if they go into, like, I remember reading a thing on Mahomes, this really could go on, Connor. I remember reading a thing on Mahomes and the scouting reports when he was doing the scout team, and immediately the players were saying, okay, straight away we recognize he's a quarterback of the future and we get why he's been selected. What happens if Michael Penix come July is doing something similar and he's knocking it out of the park in the camps, and Kirk Cousins is slowly coming back from a long serious injury? And then what happens to the locker room when the players recognize we've got a really, really good quarterback here?
I tell you what happens to the locker room. If you're winning games, everybody gets behind the guy who's winning games. Like, and I accept everything you're saying, but I will put the communication clearly wasn't ideal, and it's not what you expect for Cousins and his agent to be throwing the toys out of the pram. And in fairness to Kirk Cousins, he's not the kind of guy who normally creates a fuss, right? If there's one thing that's off-brand for Kirk Cousins, it's making it all about him or kicking up. That's not what he does. So, like, if you've produced that kind of reaction, there's something going on. However, Cousins is 35. He's coming off a very serious injury, as we know, the Achilles. You don't know what he's going to be like when he comes back. So, and we don't know what the Falcons know or don't know either. So maybe there's a thought there that this guy's not going to make it through the season, and we need to have not only regard to who's going to be the backup, but also regard to what's going to happen in the future. Now, that again factors back into the decision to give him the contract that they gave him as well, Brian, which I totally accept, which may be the original sin here. And the pick might look very different if they hadn't guaranteed Cousins the kind of money that they guaranteed him. I think that's a big factor here in terms of how the organization has been run. But if you think that, and the other side of this is both the Saints and the Raiders, and I think there was one other team we heard afterwards, had been looking to trade up. So it might be the case that Falcons thought they would pick up a quarterback, thought they might pick up Penix maybe towards the end of the first, maybe into the second, and then the way things were going, thought, crap, that's not going to happen here, and we need to change course. And if we really think quarterback is the way to go, we're going to have to just pull the trigger here. So again, it seems like they didn't game out those scenarios, because if they'd been listening to us, they would have probably felt a little bit less secure that Penix might fall to them in that spot. But I don't know, who knows? But I don't hate the idea of taking a quarterback when one is there, especially when you just don't know what kind of longevity you're going to get out of Cousins. But they did not handle this well.
You touched on there, like the Steve Weiss interview, and we referenced that quite a few times last Thursday, because it was really precise around what we thought the Falcons were going to do. He flagged that they could potentially trade down, and maybe that's the scenario where they felt like, we'll trade down because then we'll move down to maybe, I don't know, 11, 12. We'll get Michael Penix there and we'll pick up a few assets. But then it was probably very evident, very clear. Whoever's coming up to 8 is probably taking Michael Penix, and that's the reason why we had to stick and twist. I also recognize the GM saying we don't want to be back in the top 10 again, and if we play at the level we believe we can with Kirk Cousins, we won't be, and therefore we've got to get the quarterback of the future. I just think if you want to be that team that wins the division and be in the scenario, I don't think ultimately it's all down to Kirk Cousins, because we've seen time and time again with this Falcons team, they're in the high scoring games. I think if they could solidify some things on defense, they then traded up later on to get a defensive player, Connor. So they obviously recognized there was a need to get a defensive player. So that kind of takes away what they're saying in the conference after, and we were comfortable with our defense. Anyway, there we go.
Anyway, that pick, Noel, enabled a lot of things that happened thereafter, including, of course, Rome Odunze falling to the Bears, who were more than happy if they ever had the notion that they were going to take a defensive player to change course abruptly. Now that Rome Odunze, the guy that had been throwing with Caleb Williams and DJ Moore and Keenan Allen in LA before the draft, and who seems to have struck up a fast friendship. They flew to Detroit together. They were on the same plane, and you could see how delighted Caleb Williams was with this selection. Bears took the handoff when it was available.
Absolutely. I think this is one that Bears fans are willing into reality. And it came true in the end. I mean, look, he looks a fantastic player. He's that big kind of target. He can play out the slot as well, but he can also be that big target for a Caleb Williams, which is great for a young quarterback to have that. But the great thing for Odunze is Harrison is going to be expected to hit the ground running. Neighbors is going to be expected to hit the ground running. Odunze is going to come into an offense that has DJ Moore and Keenan Allen ahead of him. He's going to be given the time. Now, obviously, people will expect certain things from him, but he's still going to be given that time to come in, to work with these experienced players, to kind of build up. So he's not going to have the team isn't going to win or lose on his shoulders. He can just come in, get a bit of, like, there'll be, you'll be wondering now, is there enough balls to go around for these players? But that's great. That's an issue we want. But he just has that time to come into this team and to develop right. And then, who knows how long Keenan Allen is here, maybe a year, maybe two. And then Odunze, you feel, should be really ready to go at that stage. And who knows, maybe he surprised me. Maybe he'll get a little bit more into the action. But just for this Bears offense, it just feels like a perfect pick. As you say, he has that link now with Caleb Williams. Those guys seem to be friends. He was throwing with Keenan Allen and DJ Moore beforehand. So for me, this is just another look to the future, a player who absolutely makes this offense better and is someone who could be there for a number of years, and just another exciting player for us Bears fans to kind of wait and see how he does now during the season.
Brian, we've been talking over the last couple of years, and it's been a thing in the NFL that all the exciting young quarterbacks are in the AFC rather. NFC quarterbacks kind of aging out, or else just not panning out. So it's apart from Caleb Williams, Michael Penix, who we've just talked about going to the Falcons, the Vikings taking JJ McCarthy was what was expected. Probably not the way that it fell and how little draft capital the Vikings ended up having to give up to trade him and get him. Pretty good move by them, I would have thought, all around. Things worked out very nicely for Minnesota.
Yeah, again, very evident that he certainly wasn't their first choice. They made quite a substantial move in terms of what they were offering up to the Patriots. Again, I think the Patriots recognised between the offers coming in from the Giants and the Vikings, maybe we're onto something really good here. We need to stick a tree and take Drake May. But ultimately, they got who we all thought they were going to get for quite some time and what was speculated, which is JJ McCarthy. And Kevin O'Connell looked quite relaxed and quite happy with the move. And I think they were relieved that they didn't have to give away that 22 pick in the end. And it's an interesting piece, and obviously Colin's not here, but he spoke to me separately around. He wasn't enamored with the way Sean Payton kind of suggested he goaded the Vikings into moving from 11 to 10. I think anybody who pre-drafts, if the Vikings were told you're going to give away a 4th and 5th pick and you're going to get JJ McCarthy in the 4th round, bearing in mind it was touted that they'd have to give away their second 4th round pick, I think the Vikings will be quite confident that they'll go into a new season with a young quarterback who potentially could win out over Sam Darnold and be the starting quarterback. Again, just to the point I made when we were discussing the Bears at number 1, it makes for a great division next year.
Let's not forget that I did say the Vikings would use both of their picks in the first round, and I was right on that one. Wrong on many other things, but I'll take that one to the bank. Noel, the Jets, Olu Fashanu, guy I know that you'd really liked and thought might even go a little bit earlier in the draft. If you don't want Aaron Rodgers to be going to the desert, taking peyote or whatever he does out there, or ending up as a running mate in the presidential election, the best thing to do is to put some beef in front of him. Yeah,
I was a little surprised at this. I kind of felt like the Jets were in a win now mode, and I was wondering if they would go for Brock Bowers or someone else that feels like could be an impact kind of day one player. But I think this is a great pick for them. And again, in the long term, I think Fashanu was definitely the best left tackle left on the board there. And I know they brought in Torrance Smith and they brought in Morgan Moses as their tackles. But look, Smith has a bit of an injury history, so Fashanu probably will get a bit of a run out at some point this year. It's very rare that a team's offensive line, the offensive line in week 1 is the offensive line in week 16, 17, because injuries happen. So I think Fashanu is definitely the second best left tackle. I think he's the second best tackle after Joe Alt. And I think for the Jets, this is actually another building block, which is a really, really good building block to have. And as I say, I thought they might go more impact now. But they didn't. They actually look like they've built a bit for the future, which it's sensible overall, and I think it's just the right move for this team to make. And as I say, if he does get in this season, Aaron Rodgers will need all the protection he can get, because look, we saw what happened last season, and he's that bit older now. So in the long run, I think it's a good solid move from the Jets to go with this.
Brian, Sean Payton might need all the protection he can get if Bo Nix doesn't work out in Denver, but that's the move that they've gone for. A lot of mock drafts had them swinging for the fences and trying to get somebody higher up, and that wasn't really on the cards. And so that Bo Nix from Oregon is the guy they've taken at 12. Now, interestingly, for anyone who decided briefly to duck out of our draft coverage on the night and see what Bill Belichick was saying to Pat McAfee, Belichick was pretty high on Nix, and his analysis was interesting. He rated Nix as the most NFL ready of all the quarterbacks available in the draft.
Yeah, it's such a different view on him, because some people suggested he was a second round, late fourth at best, and then you have Bill Belichick stepping up and, quietly confident that he's seen enough in him to be certainly readily available to be selected as a first round pick. It's interesting. I get the pick completely. I know Broncos fans is a mixed opinion. Colin is not sold on it. There's a few others that are. They think it's a great move, and they're suggesting that it's the kind of quarterback that will suit Sean Payton. But what else for the Broncos to do, bearing in mind the plight they're in, because they don't have an abundance of selections to move up. I know Colin suggested if they did move up, they'd have to give away Patrick Surtain. They managed to hold on to arguably their best player. And they're going into a season. You look at the quarterbacks on the roster there. Obviously, they brought in Zach Wilson recently. You'd imagine he's been brought in to be a backup and nothing more than that. I think they have to roll the punches here, because George Payton ultimately is probably going to lose his job this year unless he delivers a really kind of fruitful season and a bit of a bounce back season. So I think they have to go quarterback and take a shot at it. And I think ultimately, because he's the last one on the board, if they've taken him, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. But like we suggested on Thursday's coverage, Lamar Jackson went 32nd. Just because you're the last of the 6 doesn't necessarily mean you're not going to have a fruitful season. So it'd be interesting to see. It'd be interesting to see how he handles being the Broncos quarterback. So whatever we think of the Broncos and the plight over the last 7 or 8 years, they are a team where there's heavy expectations from the fan base, and they would expect, despite the division, for them to turn things around, and he will feel the pressure immediately going in there.
Also in that division, Noel, are the Raiders. They do like their tight ends in Vegas. Darren Waller obviously has gone to Brian's Giants and left a bit of a vacuum there, and they're filling that with Brock Bowers, who seems more than capable of stepping into those shoes. This guy can do it all, and was somebody that a lot of people were very high on in the draft. A lot of people thought he might fall to the Jets, as you say, or that's where what they would choose to do, get another weapon. But it's the Raiders who end up putting a nice piece on the board there on offense.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Raiders probably, as you mentioned earlier, were looking to move up to get one of those quarterbacks. And I think when that doesn't pan out for them, this has all the hallmarks of best player available on their board when it came up. I mean, I love Brock Bowers. I think he is going to be a fantastic player going forward. And I think for the Raiders, they've done a really good job here and not getting too crazy, just seeing the best player that was left on that board, bringing them in, someone who can be an impact player in the fourth season. I mean, I've seen some people question, they drafted Michael Mayer last year and kind of a top pick. But these are two different quarterbacks. Meyer can be more of that inline blocking tight end, whereas Brock Bowers can play from the slot. He's essentially like another wide receiver, and I think he can be a very productive wide receiver, / tight end. So for me, I think that if they didn't get the quarterback they wanted, I know cornerback could have been a high need for them, and that was a premium position where players dropped down a bit. But I think Brock Bowers was the number one player left on the board, and I think the Raiders did right if they couldn't get the quarterback to at least get that player in who can be impactful for them next season.
Brian, before we move to the Saints, you had another point you wanted to make on the Raiders.
Yeah, I think they were a team of all the 32, well, not necessarily 32, but in terms of the 32 picks, they were a team that put the selection in the quickest. They didn't hang around, the best player on the board. And I was going to make a point, which now I'll double down and I was pointing out Michael Mayer. Like he was the 35th pick in this, so he's a second round selection last year. He went one behind Laporte, who had a really fruitful season for the Lions. But he might get a better opportunity next season because there could be so much focus on Brock Bowers and Devontae Adams. Maybe we'll see him come to the fore next year. So maybe they're recognizing it as, let's just get an abundance of players in here, an abundance of playmakers, and let it cook. But ultimately, it's going to be down to the quarterback and Raiders. And because of the nature of no quarterback, it's going to be Gardner Minshew. It'll be interesting to see whether he can get the job done. But they're certainly putting talent around them.
Well, that's it. I mean, geez, Devontae Adams can get open in a phone box. He's probably the best route runner in the NFL. And, Bowers, if he can do what he looked to be able to do in college, absolute yak monster. A lot of people were comparing him to Travis Kelce, saying this is the new Travis before the old Travis has even finished playing. So we will wait and see. Brian, you might continue there with the Saints, your beloved Saints. Talisa Fuanga going there. They could have gone a lot of different ways. I think on balance, we were saying in our preview, they're probably more likely to go on the offensive line because of the injury trouble that Ryan Ramczyk has had, because of the fact that Trevor Penning, the guy they had high hopes for, really just hasn't panned out.
Yeah, when we did our 20 to 11, I suggest maybe Brock Bowers to the Saints, I thought, because of the nature of what's going to happen ahead, which is going to play out slightly, that he would maybe potentially fall to the 14. I think the Saints would jump all over him to give Derek Carr another opportunity, but we did suggest if that's not the case, that they will make the sensible move is to get the offensive line solidified. It hasn't really worked out for Trevor Penning over the course of the last 2 years, and you called that out as well on the show last week. They need to put players around and give Derek Carr another opportunity and proper security. So sensible and probably the right move. And the thing is, we watched the draft coverage, but you're kind of going, I want the exciting player, but ultimately I think Saints fans will recognise this was the most prudent selection involved. There was a number of Saints fans kind of on the coverage in terms of the stuff coming in on the screen for saying Brock Bowers at 14, Brock Bowers at 14. So everybody was thinking the same thing.
It is interesting how, sometimes these things follow like a very obvious logic, and the corollary to there being a run on quarterbacks and the value that it is in the quarterback position is clearly you're going to want to put the best protection you can around the guy that you have under center. So we shouldn't really be surprised that there was a run on tackles when this was seen as having been a deep class for OTs. So, that was a very obvious and logical trend, I guess. At 15, Noel, the Colts decided to take Laiatu Latu. I have to say, I love this pick. This could turn out to be fantastic value on multiple reasons. I mean, firstly, because of the quality of the player. If it hadn't been for his medical history, and he's been completely medically cleared to play now, having had to medically retire earlier in his college career, but it does seem that the body of medical opinion, or certainly, the doctors that he's had vouch on his behalf, say he's as good as new. Talent-wise, this guy could have been a top 10 pick, and in a different draft where defensive players had been more valued and where there wasn't such a run on quarterbacks and wide receivers as we already talked about, you might not have had a guy like this at 15. I think this could be a great piece for Indianapolis.
I think this is a smashing piece of business by the Colts. Yeah, look, you look at this player. You mentioned it. The medical retirement is looming large over kind of everything when it comes to his draft spot. I mean, for a lot of people, this was the best edge rusher in the class, and just the question was, where would different teams, doctors, and medical staff kind of stand on the injuries? But obviously, the Colts weren't put off by it because they brought in a player who, he's explosive. He has a great burst. He gets around the edge, has great bend, and is powerful. And I think he's got up 23.5 sacks it is over the last couple of seasons in college. He's a player who's productive, and the Colts definitely needed another guy on the edge coming in. So for me, I think if the Colts are happy with the medical, then they're sitting there rubbing their hands thinking, look, this player has fallen to us here. As you mentioned, Connor, other years, this is a player you may need to move up to try and get if you want him. So to sit there at 15 and have him drop in your lap is perfect.
Brian, Byron Murphy went to the Seahawks at 16. We thought they would go defense. Ultimately that was the area that they needed to address. And, we talked about the reasons for their shortcomings on defense being the reason that probably Pete Carroll ended up being amicably, quote unquote, shown the door there. And Byron Murphy was the guy who fit the bill as far as they were concerned.
Yeah, Daniel Jeremiah suggested him as a dark horse to go top 10. So he falls to the Seahawks at mid-teens in the first round. I believe John Snyder has said in the press conference he actually considered potentially moving up to 12 or 13 to get him. So for him to fall down to 16, an immediate need. We did suggest he might go offensive line. I guess it was a case of what's the most appropriate position and appropriate player. But for the Seahawks to get him, I mean, imagine he'd be the type of player that will come in and have a huge impact. Some players are falling into nice spots. Like sometimes players go to the wrong team. I think in this case, Brandon Moore, he was on the upper trajectory throughout the course of the last week and leading to the draft. you'd imagine he will have a strong start to his career with the Seahawks.
No, Lard, Dallas Turner misery was finally put to an end at 17 when the Vikings took him off the board with the pick that they'd acquired via the Jaguars. The Vikings have to feel happy with the business that they've done, provided, of course, that JJ McCarthy pans out, because you got a ready-made replacement there for Danielle Hunter and one of the most, highly touted pass rushers in this class.
Yeah, look, we were all, I think, impressed with the Vikings when we saw this. Now, they have given up a lot to move up a few spots to get him, but if he pans out, Vikings fans won't be worried about that. This is obviously a very productive player. He's a physical specimen. Like he's again another player who's got good burst. He has the ability to knock our linemen back back on their feet. Yeah, I think this is a good move. As a Bears fan, seeing like the Vikings do what they've done, you kind of go, okay, fair enough. But like when you get a player who most people probably saw going at 8 or in the top 10, again, like the Colts, if you see him fall to you in that spot there, look, obviously he didn't fall to him, they moved up, but still, if you get the chance to get a player at that spot, if he makes your defense better, and obviously he will fit in that defense really well. I think he will love playing in that Brian Flores defense, getting after people. So yeah, I think it's a good move and a good piece of work by the Vikings on paper. We'll see though if it all translates then on the field.
And that brings us to the end of our first segment of our draft recap, the recap of draft 2024. Well, let's take a look at the second half of the first round, if you like, as we are recapping the 2024 draft that took place last week in Detroit, Brian. We kick off this segment with the Bengals, who took Amarius Mims at tackle. Again, we spoke a little bit earlier in the first segment about the run on tackles once that kicked off as being something obvious and something we expected before the draft. Mims is an interesting one because he looks to have all of the measurables, as they say. He's a big guy, an absolute athletic specimen. But for some people, a little bit rough around the edges and something of a project. So not necessarily guaranteed to go in the first round, but the Bengals thought it worth their while.
Yeah, and some of the coverage I saw leading up to was his versatility was also something. And so whilst he's a project, they can work on him in a number of positions. So they might find a sweet spot next season in terms of where he fits in. Sometimes it's easy just to put a player in at guard, for his opening season and let the kind of the real hogs of your left tackle, right tackle do the job. But again, they can move him around. But like he was someone that I was watching on various different shows. He was anything from in the 25 to 32 range to from 10 beyond. So there's various different opinions on him. But I'm glad the Bengals did what they did. We spoke about it in the lead up and down of our draft previews around. I think this is one we got right. We all felt they would go offensive line. I think I threw JC laid him out. I thought that was the kind of sweet spot where he'd land. He obviously goes much earlier. So we weren't far off. But yeah, I think general consensus they would protect Joe Burrow. We saw Joe Burrow get injured last year. Even when Browning played, he was struggling at times with the offensive line. Sensible move for the Bengals, who will want to be challenging again in the FC North. And right now, you wouldn't put it against them that they would be there next season.
No, a pass rusher was definite need for the Rams with the retirement of Aaron Donald, obviously, and the massive void that he leaves. I don't think the Rams necessarily thought at 19 they'd still have Jared Verse available to them.
Yeah, this was a great pick for them. A player fell into the lap. Verse obviously was being compared a lot with Dallas Turner. They were both being linked to might go first. I think most people thought Turner. For me, I was more of a Verse fan. I think I just love he's just violent and powerful. Whereas some players might look to that finesse to get around somebody. Verse just looks for contact and just hits people. And for me, I think this is a really, really good pickup for the Rams and someone. I love watching this kind of player, and I'm actually looking forward to seeing him playing now in the NFL.
Brian, the Steelers know what they're doing when it comes to the draft, and Fautanu is your classic Pittsburgh Steelers pick. Unfussy, fills an area of need, looks like he can be plugged and played right away.
Yeah, I have to say Steelers, I thought they were one of the biggest. I know it's easy to say, the winners of the draft, but they doubled down because they went offensive line in the second round as well. Kind of, it's like they've essentially reckoned, right, let's just focus on the key spots in the team. And then they bring in a wide receiver later on who, if it wasn't for injuries, potentially could have went further up the chain as well. So you'd have to look at this team and think, for a team that won 10 games last year with the quarterback situation they have, obviously people will argue they've got Eric Harris from there now in Russell Wilson coming off the Broncos experience and Justin Fields. Obviously will there be an open competition? But I think they've established, and one of the opening shows we did, Shane said he suggests he might go wide
we talk
receiver.
as well, Brian, and a quick point here I think that's worth making. Like, winning your division and getting through your division is the first priority, and the Steelers are looking out and they're seeing Myles Garrett and they're seeing the Browns
Yeah.
and they're seeing the Ravens, like, and the Bengals pass rush isn't exactly meek either. Like, they're in an absolute knife fight from day one, and they need to do everything they can to protect the quarterback.
Yeah, and I think they recognise over the course of the last 2 years, this isn't a quick fix. Like, Broderick Jones was the selection last year, so essentially they got offensive line 2 years in a row. Then they double down and take one in the second round. Like, they're trying to literally, transition to a new period with new quarterbacks and put an offensive line, but again, solidifying an offensive line for the future. So you would expect this team to be back in the forefront of the division next year and challenging. When we say that they made the playoffs this year, comprehensively beaten with the Bills, but they might be a bit more challenging come next season.
No, one of the more interesting pass rushers in the draft was Chop Robinson. Again, one of these guys who had a really impressive combine and who jumped up a lot of people's radars and probably their draft boards, not least the Dolphins, who decided they would take a chance on him. Against one of these players who's seen as a project by some draft watchers, but others thought, no, this is a guy that you want to take if he's available.
Yeah, for me, I was more in the kind of project end of things. I wasn't sure if he would have gone this high. But obviously, again, you never know how teams' boards stack up. Obviously, last season, the Dolphins had a couple of injuries with players like Phillips and Chubb, and they lose Van Ginkel. So you have a young player like this, Dan, who, as you say, has a good combine. He's obviously clearly a talented player. And again, maybe he doesn't need to come in and be an impact straight away, but he's a player, again, who can situationally come in, offer something to the team and continue to develop. So I thought it might be a little bit high for him, but again, he is talented, and obviously the Dolphins see something there that they can kind of work with and bring him along. So yeah, interesting to see how he comes along. But look, he could be a good pick. Bit of a dark horse for me at that spot, but you never know.
Brian, the Eagles, generally seen as having had a very good draft. Now, I know, like, the cult of Howie Roseman means that nobody will ever question any pick that he makes these days. Although he was that much of a genius, the Eagles wouldn't have had the season that they had last season when they were expected to contend for the Super Bowl. But far be it from me to take any shine off the general manager's office there. In fairness, though, secondary was called out as one of their biggest areas of need. We saw James Bradbury get cooked last season. Darius Slay is aging out as well. They needed to reinforce that division, and Quinion Mitchell looks like a really nice selection for them at 22. And they doubled down, as you were saying with the Steelers earlier. The Eagles doubled down the secondary because they picked up Cooper DeJean in the second round.
Yeah, Cooper DeJean that we had when we were doing our previews was mocked between 10 and 20, and he falls to the second round. And you can understand immediately why they go and take him. Like, they have been exposed over the course of the last season. They won some games and high scoring games, like the Bills game, where they laid dramatics and they got it over the line in overtime. But I mean, they were taking a part in that. And we think of the 49ers game on that Sunday night in Philadelphia when they were exposed, and then they were exposed in the playoffs. So it was like immediate need. So I'd be interested to see if both of them can play realistically, if they can play, alongside one another. Ultimately, I think Mitchell will start, and it'll be a case of Slay or Bradbury on the other side, and then maybe they'll transition into both of them. So, but again, you could argue they're solidifying the secondary very early and into the future with two young guys. So yeah, immediate needs, and they've addressed it. And yeah, everybody's raving about it, but like every year, everybody's raving about the Eagles draft. So let's just see how it plays out. It'd be interesting to see when they get into CeeDee Lambs and other various different players against them.
We thought, Noel, that the Jags would probably go receiver, especially since Calvin Ridley's departure, and Brian Thomas from LSU was the pick there. Like, Brian Thomas was one of these interesting players where some people had him going really high, some people had him dropping to the second round. He seemed to have quite a wide range, and nobody was quite able to get a beat on it. But Jags were quite happy to take him at 23.
Yeah, I actually think this is a good move for the Jags. Obviously, they moved down after trading with the Vikings. So I wonder, is he the player they were targeting anyway? If so, then it's amazing for them to drop down and still get him there. But yeah, I think for a lot of people, this was the fourth best receiver in the draft. I think the Jags have been making some moves there at receiver. And to be able to bring a young player like this in, I think just gives them that extra firepower. He is a deep threat going forward. He's been very productive in college. And as we say, outside the big three who were kind of off on an island on their own, he was seen as being that next choice for a lot of people. So for the Jags to get him at 23, I think it's a good move for them. Obviously, they lose Calvin Ridley, so he's someone who can come in and hopefully for them be productive.
Brian, at 21, a team that I'm really interested to watch, and not just for selfish reasons, because they're in the NFC North, the Detroit Lions next season. I'm interested to see how they go about backing up to the season they had this year, and hopefully from their perspective, trying to go one better. They went cornerback with Terrion Arnold from Alabama, one of the higher mocked secondary prospects in this draft, and again comes from a school that tends to produce very good cornerbacks in Alabama. You look at the way the Lions season finished last year, and we talk so much about Dan Campbell and the decision to go for it in fourth down. But really, what happened to the Lions?
Bringing that back up again, Connor. Yeah.
Well, no, I was bringing back up to move on from it. Really, if you want to look at the substantive reason why they lost that game, it's because they got sliced and diced by the 49ers in the second half, who were passing all over them, and their secondary was kind of showing up.
In a way, it'll be kind of win or bust again with secondary, because they've completely overhauled their secondary in free agency as well. Just bearing in mind, like Amik Robinson, Carlton Davis were brought in free agency, and then you're going to leverage that with a new cornerback going in. So essentially, they've recognised, and we called it out like they did. We knew this was I suppose a position of need. We felt it would be cornerback, and you're right. You're bringing in an Alabama player, so you'd imagine he'd be able to hit the ground running. But it'll be interesting because these guys will have to transition into a new defensive scheme, get to know each other, play together. And where other teams have had that luxury of understanding the nature of defense, these guys won't. And you're trying to merge them all together very quickly into a new season. The Lions will be winning games, but I still think we're going to see that Achilles heel come back, which is high scoring games and secondary being exposed. But we spoke about it. Those two playoff games got over the line against the Bucs, but they didn't get over the line against the 49ers. They got exposed greatly in the second half, and ultimately that was their downfall. But yeah, look, it makes sense. It's a good move. But we'll be interested to see how they transition. They'll have to do it quickly.
No, I spoke about the Steelers earlier not being flashy or splashy about their first round draft picks over the years. You could say the same about the Packers, but they generally get it right. Jordan Morgan, the tackle from Arizona, is the guy they picked up there. Someone who, again, was widely liked and thought of very highly among this deep tackle class, and looks again a good move for Green Bay.
Yeah, I think generally when the Packers pick an O-lineman, they usually do a good job. You look at it, obviously they lose Bakhtiari off the line, they lose Runyon on the line, so they had a little bit of work to be done there. You look at the wide receiver group, that looks fairly set and young. Tight end, they look fairly set, and at running back. So what you want to do for Jordan Love then is just make sure that line in front of him stays solid. So to bring in someone like Morgan then, who I've been reading, obviously he played left tackle in college. I've been reading a lot. Maybe he may end up back guard for the Packers. We'll see if that's the way it kind of plays out. But again, generally, as I say, when the Packers pick an O-lineman, it usually works out. It looks like it's a solid move for them there. And yeah, that's a player onto their offense who they'll hope will just be able to keep Jordan Love upright, as all these other young, exciting players I mentioned earlier kind of continue to do what they did last year and develop even more this season.
Brian, a piece of analysis I remember we talked about before the draft had it that the lowest percentage chance of a first round pick busting is if you pick a center, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers went with the versatile Graham Barton, who can play at center and at guard and looks like a good piece to add to their O-line.
Yeah, essentially they're really doubling down. They've given Baker Mayfield obviously that contract, not a substantial contract, but a very fair and balanced contract for what he did last year, and he's had a great upward turn in his career. Bear in mind, when he went in there last year, it felt like it was last chance saloon and his final opportunity to prove himself. But I think they've recognised that last season was good, but there was still kind of, teams that exploit them defensively. We saw games there where he struggled and Baker Mayfield struggled, but over the course of the season, he delivered. I think it's a very sensible move. They've had some players retired over the course of the last year. Since Bray left, Ryan Jensen in particular was a real strong point there, and obviously they needed to get a centre, so absolutely makes sense. It's good to see certain teams sticking to what they know is the right thing, such as the Steelers, such as the Chargers, and protecting their quarterback for the future.
No, you see risers and fallers in the draft, and you see guys in particular who impress at the combine or who put it in the Senior Bowl. And Darius Robinson, who went to the Cardinals at 27, the edge rusher from Missouri, is one of those players who seemed to impress everybody that spoke to him, saw him, or interacted with him during his whole pre-draft experience. And as a result, got himself into the first round. For a guy who there was no hype around a year ago, he's really shown up big here.
Yeah, again, this is another move I was slightly surprised by. I thought Johnny Newton was someone who could have maybe gone in there ahead of him. Obviously,
Johnny Newton's another interesting one, actually, before we get into Robinson, because he did end up going to the Commanders, I think, in the second round, if I remember
yes, he
correctly.
did actually. Yeah.
But this is a guy who was projected to go first, but for the asterisk around the foot injury. Big guy, issue with the small bones in the foot was something that seemed to disturb a number of teams who might otherwise have selected him in the first round. And sorry, to your point, Darius Robinson was one of the beneficiaries of that.
I think that's exactly it. I mean, when you have question marks like that, and as you say, big guy, you know, foot injury, small bones, you kind of wonder how that's going to kind of hold up. But look, Robinson is a player, he can play inside or on the edge. So maybe versatility like that is something that the Cardinals want there, because the Cardinals had a lot of holes and they did need to fill them on defense as well. So maybe a versatile player. I mean, he was a bit slow in the combine. I think his combine 40 wasn't the best. But obviously, look, they've seen something there that they think they can develop and they can use. So yeah, I'll be keeping an eye on a player like this, because as I say, I just think it's probably a bit high for him. I wasn't overly impressed with him, and as you say, he didn't really have that kind of hype. But again, sometimes this happens. Players you don't see coming are the ones who develop into, you know, really good, productive players on the field. So we'll see if that's the case here.
Brian, the Chiefs pick at 28, I'm kind of more interested in where that pick came from than who they took with it. Like, the Chiefs trade with Buffalo. Did the Bills just not want to win the Super Bowl? The last time they traded a pick in the first round with the Chiefs used it to select Patrick Mahomes. The Chiefs traded with the Bills clearly to get the wide receiver they wanted. Why would Buffalo enable Kansas City to do something like that? Even if the guy doesn't work out, why would you let your biggest rival select the player that they want?
I think they genuinely probably felt he wouldn't go wide receiver. I know there was a lot of talk, and Wardy was certainly one that he had kind of lit it up in the combine, and since then he was obviously touted to be a number one pick because of his speed and agility, and he'd be like that Tyreek Hill type of player for the Chiefs. What I would say is, like, I know it's early days, but like the Chiefs haven't had the greatest success in terms of going after wide receivers. Like Nicole Hardman is okay, he scores a winning touchdown in the Super Bowl, but they did get rid of him for a reason. He did go to the Jets because they wanted to move on from him. They brought him back. Like Kadarius Toney trade.
He also nearly lost him the game against the Ravens by spilling the ball through the end zone, if you recall.
Lost the ball in Buffalo as well, which went in for a touchback as well. So like there was two scenarios where he's been involved in plays. So like he sorry, I was going to, and Kadarius Toney was a trade they made, and like again, so like the Chiefs have, whilst they keep winning Super Bowl, they do have a history of going out on a limb for certain ones. It doesn't necessarily always work out. So whilst the Bills are getting the stick for the trade, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work out to the Bills' advantage. But I generally think they just didn't feel they would go wide receiver, and then it was probably they doubled down. We're going to get
I know what you're saying about how they've used their picks and some of the swings and misses they've had on wide receivers. Yeah. You can probably throw Sky Moore in there in the second round as well. They haven't had huge luck there either. But why would you help the Chiefs at all?
I think the Bills recognised that they didn't have a huge bandwidth in terms of selections available to them. They need to get more picks. They obviously want to plug and play certain positions. They probably felt that if we do go back to 32, we're comfortable with any, like the fact that they traded back again with the Panthers, and then obviously they had the first pick on the Friday night. To me, it was a sense of just 2 or 3 wide receivers we have in mind here. We're comfortable with whoever we get, and we'll double down and take more selections off other teams.
No, the Cowboys at 29 via Detroit got another tackle, Tyler Guyton from Oklahoma, another big guy, you know, real physical specimen, even among the physical specimens at that position. It was kind of a ho-hum night for the Cowboys, though. There wasn't much to get excited about.
No, but I actually like this pick. I think this is the right pick. It may not be obviously the sexy pick in terms of O-linemen and stuff like that, but I think that the Cowboys had issues on their O-line. Obviously, they lose Tyron Smith, who ends up going to the Jets. So Tyler Guyton is as you say, he's a big 6'8", you know, tackle. I know he played right tackle in college, but interestingly enough, he played right tackle. His quarterback was actually a lefty, so he was actually guarding the quarterback's blind side. But I think this is a really potentially good player. I know he hasn't started many games in college. I think it's 13 or 14 games he may have started. But I think if you're the Cowboys, you have a hole there, and this player looks like if he develops the right way, he could be a really good player going forward. And for me, I think it's the right pick to make, given the holes that they had on the offensive line.
Brian, at 30, the Ravens selected a cornerback, Nate Wiggins, another highly touted secondary prospect from Clemson. Ravens know what they're doing in the secondary, so you'd have to suspect they're not a team that you tend to see people questioning when they make a selection like this. They know how to turn these guys around.
Yeah, he's going to go into a secondary with Kyle Hampton playing safety, and you got Marlon Humphrey on the other side. So I mean, they've got the players there. This is where I think that's my concern with the Lions. They don't have the players there. They've brought different players in. Where you're going into a system which is already in place. Like we saw, the nature of the fact that their defensive coordinator is now the head coach of the Seahawks, kind of recognized the enormity of how strong that defense was last year. He's, from looking at some of the coverage of him, he's elite in terms of his speed. So it's probably something that the Ravens really needed to get a little bit of an upgrade on in terms of speed in the secondary. So that's something that they've, and for them, I saw the coverage in terms of them in their war room. They were delighted. It was like when you're at 30, it's very much what's going to fall to us. And he was one that was touted to go higher. So you would imagine he will fit in nicely, and we'll see him contribute straight away.
49ers pick, which is the second last one of the first round, though, was a little bit of a head scratcher. You know, at this stage, Lad McConkey, A.D. Mitchell, and a few other receivers who were thought maybe to have had back at the first round potential were still on the board, but they went with Ricky Pearsall, wide receiver from Florida.
Yeah, I really like the player, but as you say, there were other players there who you kind of think maybe were ahead in the queue to be picked. But look, Ricky Pearsall, he had a fantastic combine. If you go back and look at his scores in every single exercise he did, he was up near the top in terms of, you know, the percentile of where he ranked. He was a really, really good player. He's a productive player. He's a big guy, 6'1", but he's also a very speedy guy. So you look at the 49ers, obviously there's question marks now. Is Ayuk, you know, is he going to get a new contract? Is he going to be traded? So to see them go wide receiver isn't a surprise. As you say, the name of the receiver they went with may be a surprise to some, but I actually think he can be a really good player. I think when you look at everything he brings to his game, he is a good player. And we look at this wide receiver group as a whole. They were all very closely kind of bunched together, you know, so going right at the end of the first round and a few of them going right at the start of the second, it's really not too much of a difference between them. So yeah, look, would you bet against the 49ers? They know what they're doing on offense, so I think this could be a really good pick for them.
Brian, at 32, the Bills, not content with trading with Kansas City to help Kansas City win the third Super Bowl in a row, decided that they'd spread the love and help the Panthers trade back into the first round so they could get, as you memorably quipped on the night, Xavier Leggett. It's Leggett, but we stretched it a little bit because it was time for us to leg it at that point at 5 o'clock in the morning or whatever ungodly hour it was. Bryce Young, as we know, sent into a terrible situation last year because of the trade that the Panthers had done. They ended up getting rid of their best wide receiver in DJ Moore, and they didn't leave Bryce Young with too many options in terms of what he was going to do with the football with predictable results. Is Xavier Leggett going to help the situation next year?
Yeah, I believe he will. I mean, you bear in mind they brought in Deontay Johnson, who had a fruitful season for the Steelers. I think what you recognised from the Panthers draft was they wanted to get explosive players. They recognised that this offense needed a kickstart for next season, and they needed to give Bryce Young weapons. Otherwise, he's going to struggle again next season. Now, they brought in David Brooks in the second round, the running back again, who we spoke about, and Kieran suggested might be a late first round pick. So you look at his coverage, and he's another explosive player that can, not necessarily just run the ball, but he can take the ball, in terms of screen passes, etc., and get himself out on the perimeter. So it's very evident they were trying to find explosive players. And if you look at some of his covers, like his downfield threat is obviously very obvious in terms of what you see on the tape. So it makes sense when they're going to try their utmost to give him players around him. So yeah, we were legging it at 10-5, but I think we might see him legging it into the end zone next season and maybe give Carolina that real deep field threat.
Well, it's time once again for us to leg it. We've lots more content coming up, though. We're not that far away from workouts. We got the schedule announcements coming up. We'll probably have more news like we had earlier, hopefully looking for confirmation of that reporting that the Jags will indeed play 2 games in London. So keep an eye out for that. We'll be with you very soon, but that's all for now on the Irish NFL Show. Thanks for being with us.